So, good evening. Tonight we are learning Maseches Pesachim Daf Samach Vav. Sorry, just got to fix my shaky thumb. There you go. We're starting at a new parak, Baruch Hashem. We're starting parak Elu Dvarim, and we'll be speaking about in this Mishnah some of the halachos where Erev Pesach intersects with Shabbos. So, of course, the shechita is allowed. We know that the Torah requires of us to do the Korban Pesach bismano. But what about all of the other components of the Korban Pesach? So let's get started with this new parak. Parak Elu Dvarim Samachem Beis, 2/3 of the way down at the new parak. Elu Dvarim BePesach Dochen Es HaShabbos. The following items, the following aspects of the Korban Pesach are Doches HaShabbos. One can do them on Shabbos. What would they be? Shechita, so obviously the shechita itself, the zrikas damo, and the actual zrika, the actual throwing of the blood, umichui krava, the actual cutting open of the animal to access its innards, ve'aktaras chalavav, and also to be maktir the chalev. All of those things are allowed. However, aval, tzliyasa v'hadachas krava, the actual roasting, the hadachas krava, the rinsing out of the inside of the animal. Einan dochen es HaShabbos. Good, very clean so far. That we have shchita, zrika, michui, kravav, and haktaras chalavav that are mutter on Shabbos, and tzliya and hadachas kravav, those are not allowed to be done on Shabbos. What about stuff that kind of leads up to the event? Famously from Parak Rabbi Eliezer Demila, can you do the machshirei mitzvah? Can you bring the knife if you forgot it? If you're the mo, you forgot the knife. There's no eruv. Can you bring it? The Gemara says if you forget a bandage, you can wrap it around your finger. Not very sanitary, but you can wrap it around your finger so that you're wearing it, quote unquote. This just came up this past Shabbos. We were in a little place, a little hole in the wall in Orlando, and there was no eruv there. So one of my kids was tempted to take his mask down on Shabbos as we were walking. So you're not allowed to do that. That's not derech levisha. When do you ever think about these things? So that's what the Mishnah in Maseches Shabbos was dealing with when it came to the bandage, the ispalanis that was used as a bandage to put around the aver after the bris milah. So here too, what about things that are machshirei mitzvah? So says the Mishnah, fourth line into the Mishnah, har kavaso, carrying the animal on your shoulder, v'hava aso michutz l'tchum, and bringing it more than 2,000 amos from the city. The chatichas yavalto, and the removal of a wart or some type of growth on the animal, ein dochen es HaShabbos. None of those are doches HaShabbos. They're machshirei, so they're not allowed. Rabbi Eliezer Omer dochen, he of course was a famous opinion of Maseches Shabbos that does allow for these things to take place, but even though they're machshirei mitzvah, because they're machshirei mitzvah, therefore it's allowed because they're machshirei mitzvah. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, and I can prove my shita first to the longest line, Samachem Beis. Valudinu, there's a logic to be had here. Ma'im shchita shehi mishum malacha doches HaShabbos. We know that the shchita of the Korban Pesach, shchita is a malacha doraisa. It's literally listed in Maseches Shabbos Ayin Gimel as one of the malachos doraisa, shchita. So if that's doches HaShabbos, then these three things quoted from line 4, har kavaso v'hava asa michutz l'tchum and chatichas yivalto elu shehin mishum shvus lo yitchas HaShabbos. Those things that are only Yisur. If you can do the Yisur D'Oraisa of Shechita, you should be able to do the Yisur D'Rabanan of the Machshirei Mitzvah. That's Rabbi Eliezer's svara as to why it should be mutter. Amar le Rabbi Yeshua, sorry. No, that's not a good argument. Why not? Because says Rabbi Yeshua, Yom Tov Yochiach, I have a case of Yom Tov which can disprove your theory. Shehitiru bo mishum malacha v'asir bo mishum shvus. And Yom Tov, we have cases where there is Yisur D'Rabanan, while there are mitzvos, while there are malachos d'oraisa that are mutter. Amar le Rabbi Eliezer. Could you imagine? You're talking to the great Tana of Rabbi Yehoshua, and you call him Yehoshua by the first name. Mazeh Yehoshua. What are you talking? What kind of argument was that? What are you talking about? What's the problem with the argument? Maraya rishus lemitzvah. I'm talking about the mitzvah of Korban Pesach. You're talking about the rishus of shechting an animal on Stam Yontif. You want to have an animal, you go out in the yard, you shecht an animal. No problem. But that's a rishus. That's not a mitzvah. You can't compare the world of a regular yontif and the rishus to shecht a korban on that regular yontif to the Korban Pesach. Eino dome. Again, not a level playing field. You can't compare the Korban Pesach to the regular yontif. That's one's a mitzvah and one's a rishus. Heishi Rabbi Akiva, you're right. Good argument. V'amar hazah tochiach, the hazah, the sprinkling of the mechatas, that could be a proof when a person's tamei. And we have the afer hapara that's mixed into the water, the para aduma. We sprinkle it on the person in order to make them tahor. I have a raya from there. Shehi mishum mitzvah, vehi mishum shvus. Checks off both boxes. It is itself a mitzvah, and it is itself an isur. There are isurei derabanan, and there we see ve'eno doches Shabbos. So says the Gemara in the name of Rabbi Akiva. That's a very good argument back to Rabbi Eliezer. Afata, you too. Al titma al elu. Don't give me such a difficult time about these dini derabanan, about the harkava, so carrying on your shoulder, and michutz latchum, and the case of chatichas yavalta. Those are all easy. Shaf al pishay mishum mitzvah v'hei mishum shvus, even though they're related to the mitzvah deraisa of korban pesach, and even though they're only these three things are only the geder isur derabanan, only in quotes. It's still severe to violate an isur derabanan. According to the Rambam, if you violate an Isser D'Rabbanan, you also violate an Isser D'Oraisa, because the Torah says that you need to follow the Chachamim, Al Pi HaTorah Asher Yerucha. So you have to follow the Chachamim. So the Rambam was of the opinion that if you violate an Isser D'Rabbanan, it's worse than violating an Isser D'Oraisa, because now you're not only violating an Isser D'Rabbanan, but you have an Isser D'Oraisa to violate an Isser D'Rabbanan. So you were coupling your Isurim. He says it's worse to do that. So then, even though it's only Mishum Shvus, Lo Yidchu Es HaShabbos. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, V'Allah Anidan. I don't even agree with what you said about Hazah. I disagree with you, because when it comes to Hazah, when it comes to the Isuri D'Rabbanan of Hazah, I would have made the following argument. When it comes to shchita by the korban pesach, we do say that it's doches haShabbos, absolutely. He argues and disagrees fundamentally with hazah. The isur derabanan that are associated with hazah, whatever they may be. So there, Rabbi Eliezer disagrees with Rabbi Akiva and says that it is absolutely mutter. So Amar lo top of Samach Vav Amud Aleph, the Mishnah continues. It's a long Mishnah. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, Ochaluf. I could have argued the opposite way as well. You started out by arguing that, assuming that shchita was mutter. Well, what if we started the argument from the other direction? Ma im hazah shemishum shvus ein doches haShabbos. I could have argued the exact opposite. If hazah, which is only nisr derabanan, is not doches haShabbos, then shchita shemishum malacha ein odin shelo tidches haShabbos. And when it comes to Yontiv, maybe we should assume that shchita is not allowed. What do you mean that shchita is not allowed in Yontiv? Pashat shchita is allowed in Yontiv. Says the Gemara, Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer, Akiva, akarta mashakasu batorah. You have mefurish a pasuk in the Torah that allow it. What are you talking about? Of course, it's allowed to do. You're allowed to do shchita and Yontiv. That's malachas ochel nefesh mamish. It's the first malacha. You're allowed to do shchita. Pashat, that's allowed. Why would you not do that? So it says the Gemara, and then it's still pushing against Rabbi Akiva, or as Rabbi Eliezer called him, simply Akiva. Akarta mashakasu batorah b'moado. The Torah says b'moado. Bein b'chol, bein b'Shabbos. The korban pesach can be brought. Amar lo, Rabbi Akiva says back to Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi, listen. We should be treating these things the same way we treat shchita. We should be treating them the same way. Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva, the way that we should look at them is as follows. And this is a famous rule, a well-known rule, one that has application halacha l'maisa when it comes to certain malachos on Yontiv. Kol malacha she'efshar la'asosa me'erev Shabbos ein doches haShabbos. Any malacha that you could have done prior to Shabbos, you should have done prior to Shabbos. And if you didn't do it, that's too bad for you. Shchita she'efshar la'asosa me'erev Shabbos. But if you have a shchita, if you have an activity that you need to do that you couldn't have done beforehand, then of course you're allowed to do it doches haShabbos. Very good. So that's our Mishnah, which speaks about a variety of issues, but primarily a debate about whether or not the Isuri D'Rabbanan on line 4 of the Mishnah of Harkavaso would be Asur or not, machlokas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer. Opens the Gemara 10 lines down. Samach Vav Amud Aleph. Tanu Rabbanan. The rabbis taught us halacha zu, the halacha of the Korban Pesach when it intersects with Shabbos. Halacha zu nis'alma mi b'nei Beseira. The Bnei Beseira, they Rashi here on the Gemara, 2 lines into the lines of the Gemara, about 8-9 lines down, says Bnei Beseira Nisim Hayu. They were Nisim. These were great Tanaim. So they were the Bnei Beseira and Nis Alma. They forgot the din. Could you imagine? You know, these were the Tanaim and they forgot a din. We'll see what happened in a little bit. So, anyways, Pamachas Chal Arbasar Lios B'Shabbos. The 14th of Nisan intersected with Shabbos. Shachachu, they forgot the halacha. V'lo yadu im Pesach doches haShabbos im lav, and they didn't know if the Korban Pesach was allowed to be executed, if it could be done on Shabbos or not. They couldn't remember. Amru, they said, Klum yesh adam she'odei im Pesach doches haShabbos im lav. Does anybody know the din? Can anyone tell me what they remember from shiur? Are we allowed to do the Korban Pesach when it intersects with Shabbos? Amru lahem, people said back to him, Adam echad yesh she'ala miBabel. There's a person who came from Babel, the Hillel Hababli Shema. He was referred to as Hillel Hababli. Sheshimesh shnei gdolei hador shmai v'avtalyon. And he was Mishamish, the great Shmaya ve'Avtalion, and we know famously Gadol Shimushim Limuda that it's critical for a person to spend time with Gedolim, not only to learn Torah and not to do errands for them, but to watch them and watch their face and watch their behavior and watch the way that they function, watch the way they do things, their hanhagos. So that's what he did. V'yodeya, he'll know in Pesach Doches HaShabbos Yimlav if the Korban Pesach is allowed to be done on Shabbos or not. Fine. So that was the answer to the Bnei Beseira. So the Bnei Beseira went to go get him. Shalchu v'karulo, they went to go find Hillel Habavli. Amrulo, they said, the Bnei Beseira said to Hillel Habavli, do you know what the din is? We're halfway down Samach Vav Meral. Do you know what the din is? Are we allowed to bring the Korban Pesach when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos? Amar lehem v'chi Pesach echad yesh lanu b'shana shedoches haShabbos. Do you think that Pesach is the only time we ever have a question of bringing a korban on Shabbos? V'alo harba yoser mimasayim Pesachim yesh lanu b'shana shedoches haShabbos. We have hundreds and hundreds of korbanos that are similar to the Pesachim that are brought on Shabbos. We have the Korban Tamid Shel Shachar, Korban Tamid Shel Ben Arba'im. We have a Korban Musaf every Shabbos, Korban Musaf on Rosh Chodesh when it intersects with Shabbos. We have hundreds of korbanos a year. What's 200? What a strange number. We have every Shabbos. Is it more than that? I didn't do the math, but it's 2 every Shabbos at a minimum, 3 every Shabbos, Korban Pesach, that's 150. So this number is probably close to accurate. It's probably a little bit of a guzma, but nevertheless, the point is that Hillel Habavli was saying that of course you can. Amr lo minayin lach, how do you know that it's true that you can do these korbanos? Amar lehem, Hillel Habavli responded, Nemar moado bePesach, v'nemar moado betamid. It has the word moado both by Pesach and by Korban HaTamid. Ma moado ha'amur betamid doches haShabbos, just like the Korban Tamid can be doches haShabbos based on the word moado. Af moado ha'amur bePesach doches haShabbos. Ve'od, and furthermore, says Hillel Habavli, I have a kal v'chomer for you. Kal v'chomer hu ma tamid she'ein anush kares doches haShabbos. The Korban HaTamid, there only are 2 mitzvos asay shel Torah that even have an Esser Kares associated, an Onesh Kares associated with them. It's going to be the Korban Pesach and Bris Milah. But the mitzvah to bring the Korban HaTamid, if you don't bring it, okay, it's a bittul asay, you did something wrong, it's not kishmak, you don't get kapara, whatever the implications are. But there's no onish of kares. So the kal v'chomer that Hillel Habavli says is umat tamid she'ein anush kares doches haShabbos. By the Korban Tamid, if you forget to do so, there's no punishment of kares. That we see is doches haShabbos. Then Pesach, all the more so, Pesach she'onush kares. If a person doesn't bring the Korban Pesach where there is a punishment of kares, eino din shedoches haShabbos. So he said these 2 arguments, and immediately the Bnei Beseira resigned. And they said, you take the post. Wow, you're holding. So they said, miyad hoshivuhu berosh. They made him the head, uminuhu nasi alehem, and they made him, the Bnei Beseira made Hillel Habavli a nasi over them. And then he started teaching Hilchos Pesach throughout the day. They were getting ready for Pesach. He started teaching extensively. Fine. As the day was progressing, Hillel Habavli started to lay out a little bit of criticism to the people. And Hischil Mikantran Bidvarim, he started to be very sharp with them. Amar Lahem, guys, come on, I don't understand. What exactly happened to you that made you not as good as you should have been, to the point that I should have been? I live in Bavel, but I'm here in Eretz Yisrael now as a Nasi. What did you guys do wrong? I'll tell you what you did wrong. 3 lines before the wide lines, 2/3 of the way down, Samach Vav Amud Aleph, says the Gemara, you guys were lazy. You were not Meshamesh, your Rabbanim. Such an important idea that if a person wants to be an appropriate Ben Torah, there has to be a Rebbe involved, and you have to spend time with that Rebbe. Otherwise, it's problematic. You won't be able to catch the full Masorah. You'll make mistakes in what you do because there's like a 6th sense to halacha. The Rav Yosef Dov Alevi Soloveitchik used to say that there's 2 ways to paskin a shaila. When you're like a rookie, you paskin a shaila from looking in the poskim. When you're a veteran, you've learned all the poskim. So you hear the shaila and you kind of let the question sit and you're like, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel, even without knowing what the marim, it doesn't feel right. Okay, fine. It's a ritva, it's a rush, it's a rashba, fine. But there's this like 6th sense that the posek gets after so many years of answering shailas. It becomes pasha to them. Even without the Marim Makom, they can answer the question al atar, no problem at all. We need to be able to have a Rebbe that we spend time with. My Rebbe this week told me, I was talking to him about I'm actually bringing him. He's going to give the drasha on Shabbos. Rabbi Menachem Nissel, one of my rabbis, is going to be giving the drasha on Shabbos. We're bringing him in for Shabbos under the OU, and he told me a beautiful word related. He said, there's one downside to Zoom. He said, when you're on Zoom, there is the ayin, the eyes. You can see the person's eyes, but really the person's eyes are a ma'ayan, same language, ayin, ma'ayan. If you want to get the ma'ayan from the nefesh, if you want to deeply connect to someone on a nefesh level, it can't be through Zoom. You need to see their ayin mamish. You need to see their eyes mamish properly in the room. Zoom is good for content, but it's not good for this level of shemesh. You need to see the person directly to get that nefesh connection with a person. Very, very deep idea. We have to be able to see our Rabbeim. Amar lo. So Amru lo. So the Talmidim, now the new Talmidim, they said back to Hillel HaBavli after the Musar. They asked him a question, and all of a sudden Hillel HaBavli became the guy who forgot something. The Bnei Beseira couldn't remember the din, what happens with the Korban Pesach when it intersects with Shabbos. So now they put a question to Hillel HaBavli, and he didn't know the answer. We'll see why momentarily. Amru lo, they said to him, Rebbe, Shachach v'lo hevi sakin me'erev Shabbos ma'al. We forgot to bring the knife as it relates to Korban Pesach. What should we do? So what should we do? Amar lahen, halacha zu shamati v'shachachti. He's no better than they were because he also forgot something. We have to see why that happened. But I did hear this halacha, but I forgot. Ella, so he says, Hanach lehem liYisrael, let the Jews do what they do. They know the answer. Im ein neviim heim, if they themselves are not prophets, b'nei neviim heim, then they're at least the children of prophets. At Tachlis, at the end of the day, they'll know what to do. L'machar, when they looked outside, they saw what happened with the knife. Misha pischot tochvo b'tzimro. If your Korban Pesach was going to be a sheep, so then they would kind of get the knife stuck inside the wool. And umisha pischo gedi, if it was a goat, tochvo bein karnav, they would lodge it between the horns so that it wouldn't fall. But so he got his answer. And then when that happened, ra'a ma'asav v'nizkar halacha. When Hillel HaBavli saw this, Hitaka remembered what he learned from his Rabbeim, I should say in this case. Amar kach mekublani mipishmai v'avtalim. This is taka the halacha, that it should be done derech shinui, that you can have the animals bring it up. We'll analyze this shortly. So now we're gonna review a number of mini sugyas connected to what we've been learning to analyze some of the statements that we've made. Says the Gemara 10, 12 lines.
So why did he forget it? Why did Hillel forget it? What was the reason?
We'll see in the Gemara in a little bit. We'll see in the Gemara why he forgot. Omar Mar Nemar Moado bePesach v'Nemar Moado beTamid. We said above, why is it that we know that you can bring a Korban Pesach on Shabbos? Because we said you could bring the Tamid. Ma moado ha'amur b'tamid doches ha'Shabbos av moado ha'amur b'Pesach doches ha'Shabbos. That's a quote. And we saw that earlier. That's how we learned. That's how we knew that you could bring the Korban Pesach. That was Hillel HaBavli's whole answer. So says the Gemara, but wait a minute. I know the word moado is in both places, but it's not explicit anywhere that the moed, that the Korban Tamid can be brought on Shabbos. So the Tamid Gufei Minovan Dedachi Shabbos. I understand there's a Gzeira Shabbat. They have the word Moado on both places, but how do we know that by the, what's the starting point? How do we know that by the Korban Tamid that it can be brought on Shabbos? If you want to say that it's because of the word B'Moado, that doesn't work. Pesach Nami Haksiv B'Moado. That word is found in both places. That was the Gzeira Shabbat. But you can't tell me that the word b'moado was first and foremost used to explain that, yes, you can bring the Korban Tamid on Shabbos, and then it's also used for Gzeira Shabbat. That breaks rules of Gzeira Shabbat. You can't double darshan a word. So therefore, ela moado lo mashmalei, hachanami moado lo mashmalei, not by Tamid and not by Pesach. We can't say that the word b'moado is the indicator as to why it is that one is allowed to bring the Korban Tamid on Shabbos. Ella, says the Gemara, it's because of the pasuk. Olas Shabbos b'Shabbat olas hatamid. Famous pasuk. We read it in the Parsha Satamid. B'chlal, it's implied the Tamid karava b'Shabbos. It's implied that the Korban HaTamid can be brought on Shabbos. Good, we answered our question. So Hillel HaBavli's answer stands. Omar Mar, we also saw that Hillel HaBavli added a second answer to his Gzeira Shabbat. Omar Mar, 8 lines from the bottom. V'od, we said the following, Kal v'chomer. Uma Tamid she'ein anush karis doches HaShabbos Pesach she'anush karis ein odin she'doches HaShabbos. We said a svara, that just like the Korban HaTamid, which doesn't have an Isser Kares when we fail to bring the Korban HaTamid, just like over there we see as Docha Shabbos, then Korban Pesach halachas kama v'kama. Of course, by Korban Pesach, where we do have an Isser Kares, all the more so. So says the Gemara, Ikal l'mefrach. That's not a very good kal v'chomer. Malatamid shekin tadir v'chalil. There are two elements of the Korban HaTamid that are not the same, which make it incongruent with the Korban Pesach. Number one is it's tadir. What's tadir? Tadir means that it's more common. The Korban Tamid was brought twice a day, 354 days of the Jewish year. With a leap year, you add 11 days. That's it. That's what it was. And it was, you always multiply by 2. It was a much more common Korban, maybe not by volume. As we saw yesterday, there were 1.2 million Korbanos when the times of Agrippas, when they counted. But Tachlis, the day-to-day functioning of the Korban HaTamid was way, way more consistent than the Korban Pesach. So number one, the Korban Tamid was Tadir. Number two, the Chalil, it was also totally consumed on the Mizbeach, whereas the Korban Pesach was eaten b'chabura. So you can't compare these two Korban. You want to make a Kal V'chomer from the world of Tamid, which has no kares, to the world of Pesach, which has kares. The cases are not congruent at all. One of them is Tadir, and one of them is Kalil, that's Tamid, and the other one is neither. So it doesn't make any sense. It says the Gemara, Kal v'chomer amar lu b'reisha berchua. The way that Hillel HaBavli was presented in our Gemara, first we saw above a Gzer Shava followed by a Kal v'chomer, says the Gemara was actually the other way. First he presented the Kal v'chomer, and then they said, Pirchua, we have a problem, it's Tadir v'chalil, and then he gave them the Gzer Shava. So Kal v'chomer amar lu b'reisha berchua, Adar amar lu Gzer Shava. So the order that we have it in the Gemara when Hillel HaBavli was initially presenting his answer is not the way that it actually was. First, he gave over the Kal v'chomer, then they said, we don't agree, and then he said, okay, I hear where you're coming from, I'll give you the Gzer Shava instead. I don't understand. Well, once you knew that you had to give the answer of the Gzer Shava, why did you bother with the Kal v'chomer? Answers the Gemara, Ela lididhu ka'amar lehu. Hillel HaBavli was only answering on behalf of those who he was talking to. He himself, he had a Masorah to use this Gzeira Shava, even though you could, even though you could argue the distinctions of that the Korban HaTamid were both Tadir and Kalil, even though there was something distinct about the Tamid, which was incomparable to that of the Pesach. Even so, he still, Bishlama Gzeira Shava Lo Gamrisu. Maybe the others didn't have the same Gzeira Shava that I did. And of course, we have a Masorah to Ein Adam Done Gzeira Shava Me'atzma. If you don't agree with the Gzeira Shava, that's not relevant. The question is, do you have a Masorah? You can't make your own Gzeira Shava. You have to have one from your Rebbe. So says Hillel HaBavli, I had one from Shmaya V'Avtalio. You don't have it, you don't have it. What can I tell you? You don't have it. So therefore I had to give you the Gzeira Shava. The Kal V'chomer, which is very logical, that you should have done on your own. Amrulay, they said to him, Kal v'chomer pricha, but the problem with your Kal v'chomer is that it has problems with it, so that's why we need the Gzeira Shava. So he said both. He said the Kal v'chomer is fine by me, but you also need the Gzeira Shava. Omar Mar, next case, last line, Samach Vav Amud Aleph. Omar Mar l'machar, the next day we told the story about Hillel HaBavli when he had forgotten the answer to the question about how people got their knives to the mikdash if they forgot the knife for the Korban Pesach. By the way, some of the Meforshim are very bothered. What is your problem? Why aren't there shchita knives in the Beis HaMikdash? What are you talking about? So there were sometimes concerns that a shchita knife could get chipped. They're very expensive. They're very fragile. The Gemara elsewhere, I believe in Maseches Chulin, says that the shchita knife was checked a bisra ve'atufra. After every shchita, you would take the knife, and I should have brought one with me. My pinky is the sharp side of the knife, so the mole would take his thumb, he'd check it on the sides of the blade, on both sides of the blade to make sure that there's no nicks. And then on his nail, abisra, you check it on your flesh, ve'atufra. You'd also check the blade against your nail. You'd run the blade up against your nail. And if you'd feel a nick in it, then you knew that the knife was going to create a psul and you couldn't use that shchita knife anymore. And that way they would make it, but what? There were limited knives. So people brought their own knives. Maybe there's some other people wanted to argue that the Balabatim were doing their own shchita. They wanted everything to be there. It was the chavivus of the mitzvah. You're going to bring your own knife, whatever the svar is. Everybody was bringing their own knife. But some of the Meforshim are bothered by that. So it says the Gemara, we said that if a person was going to bring a sheep, it has a lot of hair, so then it has a lot of wool. So they would stick the knife, they would shove it into the hair in a safe way. Gedi, if it was a goat, tochev lo ben karnav. Well, says the Gemara, hold on, we have a whole bunch of problems with that. First of all, this is going to be brought as kachim. Says the Gemara, you can't do avoda to a kachim animal. If an animal is already dedicated to kachim, you can't have it do any work for you. You not even to carry a knife. You're not allowed to do that. Nothing, zero. It's kachim. So says the Gemara, Kihilel. All of this is like the opinion of Hillel, the Tanya, the Brisa writes, Amru Allah al Hillel miyama lo mo'al adam be'olaso. There was never once a me'ilah with an olah. Why? Because of the timing that they made it kachim. When did they make it kachim? Says the Gemara 3 lines down. They bring the animal as chulin into the azara. It was not yet consecrated. And then they would wait until the very last minute to make it kachim. And because they were waiting until the very last minute to make it kachim, so therefore there was never a problem of meila. What does that also mean for our purposes? That when the animal was walking to the mikdash, it wasn't kachim yet. You can have it carry something for you. The only Isser is to take kachim and to work the kachim, to make them do things for you. But because at this point it's not yet kachim, everything is good to go. Pesach b'Shabbos heichi matzi maktishlei. Wait, you could be makdish something on Shabbos. We don't do kinyanim on Shabbos. I can't even give you a gift on Shabbos if I'm coming to you. It's got to be you have to be makne before Shabbos. It doesn't work. You don't make kinyanim on Shabbos. So how are you going to shift the status of this animal on Shabbos? Remember, our whole Mishnah is talking about Yudalit Shechalios b'Shabbos, where the 14th of Nisan coincides with Shabbos. So how was it that you were makdish to Korban Pesach on Shabbos? V'atznan, we said, in makdishin, in ma'arichin, ben macharim, and ben magbin, shumu, maestros. All of these different forms of kinyanim, they were not allowed to be done. All of this was Jan Yom Tov, Kal v'chomer b'Shabbos. All the more so that would be true on Shabbos. So how then, back to our question, how then could you be makdish this animal? I understand your answer. I got the concept, but how are you makdish on Shabbos? That's a halachic issue. In makdishin, vein macharim, and vein magbin. You're not allowed to change the status of something on Yontif, and if it's on Yontif, it's true, it's certainly on Shabbos. It says the Gemara, don't worry. Hani, really, when do we say the limitations of this Mishnah of ein makdishin, that you cannot be makdish something on Yontif and all the more so on Shabbos? Hani, really, she'ein kavul en zman, like a korban chatas. When the korban chatas can be brought another day, it doesn't have to be brought today. So then we say ein makdishin vein machrimim. But if, says the Gemara, but if it were to be that it was a chova, if it was a korban chova that had a zman, yudalid is Shabbos. That's when I have to bring the Korban Pesach. I'm obligated to bring it. Fine. So then we say Makdishin. Then there's no problem at all. So that works out perfectly when you couple the Shita of Hillel with the Shita of the Gemara that explains the Mishnah in this way, that when it's Chovos Kavua that have a Zman, then Makdish to Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Makdish Adam es Pesach b'Shabbos v'Chagi Gaso b'Yom Tov. Beautiful. Says the Gemara, Kafto Raferach, a very clear answer as to how this all worked out. We asked the question starting at the bottom of Samach Vav Amud Aleph, how could you put the knife inside the wool between the horns of the animal? Hare, you're working an animal that has the status of Kodshim. Says the Gemara, don't worry, didn't become Kodshim till the last minute. Shabbos, you can't be makdish something on Shabbos. Yes, you can, provided that it's time sensitive. If you're Dalit is Shabbos and you have to bring the korban on your Dalit, then you can be makdish last minute, no problem. Good, problem solved. Well, problem's not really solved, says the Gemara. Halo mechamer. This is a separate Isser D'Oraisa. What's mechamer? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi is above us by 1.5 inches, 2 inches. Dibur amaschel mechamer. Rashi says, lo kari. What is mechamer? It's only called mechamer if ela b'mehema hanosas masui. It's carrying something. V'hu manhiga, and it's being led by someone. Kari le mechamer. Umuzhar alav b'perek mishich. We learned about this in Maseches Shabbos. So this is mechamer, the Isser D'Oraisa of mechamer. So, but I don't understand. You're leading the animal, and you've got a blade inside of the animal. It's not right. That's mechamer. That should not be allowed. Mechamer kile'achar yad. Yeah, but it's like a weird way for an animal to carry things. Normally, it carries things in a satchel. There's no satchel here. You just shoved it into the fur. That's kile'achar yad. Says the Gemara. So what? Mechamer kile'achar yad nami. Still, nehidi isur d'oraisa leka. I'll grant you that in this case, because it's kile'achar yad, that there's no isur d'oraisa, but isur midrabanan miha'ika. There still is a problem. There still is an isur d'rabanan. That still shouldn't be allowed. Why would you be allowed to do this isur d'rabanan? Says the Gemara. This was the question that was being posed earlier today. Davar sheyesh lo heter min haTorah, v'davar shvus omed lefana, le'akro kile'achar yad b'makom mitzvah mai. Amar lahen. That was the whole question: is whether or not this was mutter. If you have it, that was our whole Mishnah, the machlokas between the Tanaim about something that was mitzvah oriented with isurei derabanan. Do we allow that? Do we not? That was mamish our Mishnah. Amar lahen halacha zu shemati v'shachachti ela hinicho lahen Yisrael im ein nevim hein b'nei nevim hein. So we said that was the whole question. This whole question is what was posed to was posed to Hillel HaBavli, and he didn't remember the answer. Why didn't he remember the answer? Let's see the Gemara. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Kol Hamis Yaher, anyone who is a Baal Gaiva, from the word Yuhara, a word that we saw a couple of blot ago. Kol Hamis Yaher, anyone who's in this category. So then Im Chacham hu Chachmasa Mistalek Mimenu. If he's wise, he'll lose his Chachma. Im Navihi, if he's a Navi, Nuvuasa Mistalek Mimenu. Wow, very powerful. Anyone who has Yuhara, what?
That's the same thing with anger.
That's the next Gemara, that, of course. Classic Michael Feeder move. I've already learned this Gemara. Let me foreshadow for you. I love that. So says the Gemara, when there's yuhara, so then if you're a chacham, you forget you forget your wisdom. If you're a navi, you forget your nevuah. And let's explain each one. We learned that from our story, from our Gemara from Hillel. That was Aryeh's question that you asked a couple minutes ago on the Zoom. What was the case with Hillel? Amar Mar, Hischil Makantara Midvar. We said on the previous Amud, all of a sudden Hillel got all up on everybody's face and said, "Oh, what's the reason why you guys don't remember? Because you weren't Mishamesh the Rebbe. You were not Mishamesh your Rebbe." So then the Kamar Lu, and then Halacha Zu Shamati V'Shachachti. Not a line later, the Gemara says he forgot something. So he's a chacham, and he forgot his chachmaso because he was mikantran. He had said something that wasn't nice to them. What was the other example? Devora elevated herself above the other leaders. She said the other leaders weren't getting it done until I came along. And then when it was time for her to get nevuah, she didn't have it anymore. Uri Devora, wake up. Time for you to get your devorah. Time to get your nevuah. Devorah. She's talking to herself. I got to bring myself back to where I was. I lost my nevuah. Why did she lose her nevuah? Because she elevated herself above other people. Reish Lakish Amar, this is you, Michael Kol Adam. Well, this is not you, but you referenced this Gemara. It's not a nice thing to say. I didn't mean that. Sorry. Reish Lakish Amar Kol Adam shekoes, anyone who is a balkas. Im chacham hu chachmasam misalekas mimenu. Same consequences. If a person gets angry, then if he's wise, he loses his wisdom. He loses nevuah. We learned that from Moshe. But how do we know? Because one pasuk says that Moshe was angry, and then the next pasuk we see someone else is teaching his Torah. Where did he get angry? 2/3 of the way down. He got angry, and then in the next pasuk, let's see who the teacher is. Why was he teaching? Why wasn't Moshe teaching? Why was Elazar Cohen teaching? Says the Gemara, the Moshe he must have forgotten it because Kaas makes you forget. Kaas makes you forget. What's the last example of the night? Even Navi who that if you're a Navi, you'll forget things. Says the Gemara, Elisha got mad at someone. He got angry in that pasuk. I need to hear some music to get my anger back, calm down, so that I can get back to nevuah. He only got to the Batihil of Yad Hashem. He only got back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He got back to his nevuah when his kas was kept in check. Last one. Amar Rabbi Mani Bar Patish Kol Shekois. Anyone who gets angry, Afilu Poskin Avdul Min Hashamayim. Even someone who is granted greatness up in Shamayim, or so he'll be lowered from that platform that he was gifted. V'nalan me Eliyav. How do we know what happened with Eliyav? Because there was kas. Shene'emar Vayichar af Eliyav b'David. Eliyav got very angry at David. Vayomer lama zeyarata ve'almina tashta me'at hatzon ha'hinam b'midbar ani yadati es zedoncha ve'esrol levavcha ki leman re'os ha'melchama yarata. He got very angry. Eliyav got very angry. V'chiyaz al Shmuel l'mim shechinu. And when Shmuel went to go be Mamlech David HaMelech, Bekulhu Ksiv Lo Bazeh Bachar Hashem. With all the brothers of David, the language was Lo Bachar, Lo Bazeh Bachar Hashem. Hashem didn't choose that child. With Eliyav, what was the language by Eliyav? Ube Eliyav Ksiv, Vayomer Hashem Lo Shmuel, Al Tabit El Mar'ehu, don't even look at him. Ve'el Gova Komaso, and don't look at the height at which he was initially put on Kima Astiu, because I'm disgusted. Michlal, what's implied? To have a Rachim lay, he loved him, he elevated him ad ha'idna, until he got very angry. And with that, he was then Moridin also. So we see from here that Kas, even if you're put on a high level, but if you're a Baal Kas, you will be lowered from the level that you're currently at. We'll stop right here at Ashkechan, the first of the long lines on Samach Vav and Beis. We'll pick up tomorrow night, a little bit of a shorter blot, which doesn't always mean something, but hopefully it will here. And I hope you all have a beautiful